So this is the second version of that video I posted earlier this week centered around Rhaenyra and her former lover, Criston Cole. In that video, we explore the possibilities of what could potentially happen if Rhaenyra decided to forsake her inheritance and run away with the knight in shining armor. It's not required, but I suggest going to check out that video, and my other what if videos and content on this channel. Regardless though, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and let's get into the video. So Rhaenyra and Criston Cole have a fairly complicated relationship in House of the Dragon. At first glance at the beginning of the story, you could argue that they have the typical makings of a fairy tale romance. The popular rich girl and poor social outcast. Two people from very different walks of life and very different positions in society, coming together for better or worse through unforeseen circumstances, that make them realize that despite their differences in position, they have more in common than they think, and as a result, form a connection. But in most stories where this would be framed as a romance to end all romances, like some people think Daemon and Rhaenyra are, the truth couldn't be more different. Despite having some kind of bond earlier on in the series, Criston Cole and Rhaenyra Targaryen live in two different worlds. Criston, as a common-born man who always has to fight for what he wants, values his honor above all else. And Rhaenyra, who has often felt like she wasn't good enough in the eyes of her father, values her inheritance, her position as his heir to the Iron Throne, despite the opposition she's facing for being a woman. So it makes sense that after their little misconduct in episode 4, that Rhaenyra isn't eager to run away to Essos with Criston out of love. Hell, she doesn't even love Criston to begin with. Harsh as it is to say, he was only a good time to her, a way to meet her wants and desires outside of her platonic relationship with Rhaenyra. And this is what drives the pair apart. Criston Cole has tainted his honor as a member of the Kingsguard by sleeping with Rhaenyra. He's meant to protect the princess, not bed her. So in his eyes, to make things right, he has to marry her. And we all know how that went.
So you want me to be your whore?
Rhaenyra rejects him and fails to see just how important and stressful this is to Criston. She says she wants to continue as they began, but Criston doesn't want that. Every night they would spend together would be a risk. If they get caught, Rhaenyra as the princess may be punished, but Criston Cole as a low-born man who broke his Kingsguard vows could be tortured, exiled, and even killed.
I've soiled my white cloak. It is the only thing I have to my fucking name.
So Rhaenyra's harmless request is like an insult, a slap in the face that earns her an enemy for life. But what if things went differently? What if Criston Cole never walked away from Rhaenyra? What if he not only considered her offer, but accepted it? How could the story change if Criston chose to be a lover and not a fighter? We'll set the stage in episode 5. After trying and failing to get Rhaenyra to come around to the idea of marriage and adventure with him in Essos, Rhaenyra comes to Criston with an offer of her own. Despite her friendship with Rhaenyra, the two have no romantic feelings for one another. Rhaenyra is gay, so he doesn't feel attracted to Rhaenyra in the slightest. And in the words of Rhaenyra, sometimes she just prefers duck.
I prefer roast duck to goose. I cannot say why.
And Criston happens to be that duck. So while she won't give up her inheritance for a life in Essos, she does offer that they can still have fun together. They can share a bed without being wed. It's a pretty common occurrence in Westeros, and Daemon, the rogue prince, is a prime example of it. During the first part of the series, Daemon is married to a woman named Lady Rhea Royce, who he also calls the Bronze Bitch. Yet, despite being married to her, he regularly sleeps around, visiting brothels and lying with Massaria. Aegon II even does this as well later on. He's married to his sister Helena, and like Daemon, it wasn't a marriage of his choice, so he sleeps around on her, fathering numerous bastards. Though as I just mentioned earlier, something like this would be very risky for a person like Criston Cole. As her Kingsguard, he's forbidden from holding lands, titles, having a wife, and fathering sons. The Kingsguard who have broken this vow and been found out have always been severely punished for it. Lucamore Strong, a past relative of Lionel, Harwin, and Rhaenyra Strong, was known as Lucamore the Lusty. He served as King Jaehaerys' Kingsguard and broke his vows. He married in secret not once but 3 times, and each of his wives were ignorant of the others. He fathered a total of 16 children, and when he was caught, his children were deemed bastards by the king. Lucamore was given the snip and sent away to the wall, and his wives were exiled from King's Landing. So it actually makes a lot of sense as to why Criston would panic at this offer. He has so much to lose. So what could make him choose to stay as Rhaenyra's lover? In canon, the weight of his broken vow and rejection from Rhaenyra pushes him to the edge. He feels he lost his honor, forever disgraced himself, and perhaps the only way to redeem himself for his deplorable actions is with death. That is, until Alicent shows up. We don't know what she did to get him on her side, but I'd surmise that she offered him a chance at redemption and honor. As two people both spurned by Rhaenyra, they could come together and make things right, do things the honorable and decent way.
I have to believe that in the end, honor and decency will prevail.
So let's say something like this actually happens between the princess and the knight. After being rejected, Criston Cole of course begins to panic, but we'll say that before he walks off, Rhaenyra pulls him in. Perhaps this time she's a bit more understanding of his feelings. She of course says that she won't tell anyone about what happened, but also tells Criston that he is a good and honorable knight. The fact that he feels guilty about what he's done is proof enough, but she also tells him that before he is a knight, he's also a man. He has a life of his own, wants of his own. In the same way that she's the princess, heir to the throne, and a woman that some don't believe in, she's still a person. She has wants and desires too, and it's ludicrous that she has to give those up for the sake of the realm, and that his life shouldn't be in danger as a result. So like with Rhaenys earlier on in the series, she says that when she's queen, she'll make a new order.
When I'm queen, I will create a new order.
And when that happens, people like Criston and herself get to be free to love and do as they want without fear. It's a lovely sentiment, but we'll see how that goes when she gets older. For now, she asks for Criston to stay and help her make that dream a reality. By giving him a new, more noble purpose in life, like changing the flawed system of Westeros, aside from just being her friend with benefits, it actually persuades him to stick around. So in this timeline, since Criston decides to stay with Rhaenyra, a lot is going to change. For starters, if he stays her lover, then this means when Alicent gets suspicious of Rhaenyra for what happened with Daemon, when he gets confronted by the queen, chances are he's not going to say anything. There will be no confession, so Rhaenyra's affair is actually kept a secret for the time being. So Alicent won't be ready for conflict so early on. This means that there won't be any green dresses at the wedding. And speaking of which, with Criston Cole now being on board with Rhaenyra's operation, the wedding most likely goes on without a hitch. Criston Cole won't be so mentally unstable that when Joffrey comes around, he doesn't kill him. So things go smooth. Laenor gets to keep his lover and won't be as depressed like he is in canon over his death. This could potentially lead to him being a more active figure in the court of Westeros and being more involved with his children. But during episode 6 is when the real changes start occurring. Since Criston is going to be the lover of Rhaenyra for the foreseeable future, this means that he basically fills in all the roles of Harwin Strong. So the commander of the City Watch will have no connection to the princess. And since Laenor is most likely still unable to impregnate Rhaenyra, this means that her first 3 sons, assuming that things stay the same in that sense, would be the sons of Criston Cole. So the Strong boys are now the Cole boys. So for all of you people theorizing that Jace is actually the son of Criston Cole, here you go. You get a 3-for-1 bonus. The boys this time around are technically new characters, given the fact that they have a new genetic makeup, being that of Criston Cole and Rhaenyra Targaryen. But they more or less end up with the same names this time around. Rhaenyra's eldest son is named Jacaerys, her second son is named Lucerys, but the third son gets a different name. Since Joffrey Lonmouth is still alive and well in this timeline, there's no reason to name the baby after him like Laenor did in canon. So we'll say this time around, baby Joffrey is born baby Balon, as homage to Rhaenyra's deceased brother, Balon the Heir for a Day, and her grandfather, Balon the Brave. And when he is born, Alicent does still ask to see the baby. In this timeline, though she didn't find out about Rhaenyra and Cole before the wedding, I do believe it's safe to assume that she would find out about them eventually. Assuming that the seed is still strong and the kids take after Criston like they did with Harwin, it wouldn't be hard for her to figure out what's really going on. But the difference is she can't complain about it to anyone like she did in canon. With Criston siding with Rhaenyra this time around, Alicent arguably loses her biggest supporter, her hype man. For better or worse, she's going to be a bit more isolated than she was in the canon timeline. This may mean she starts leaning on Larys the Clubfoot more in this timeline since she doesn't have Criston around to vent to. And we'll say that instead of Criston Cole, one of the Cargyle brothers, Auric, who sided with the Greens in the main timeline, actually ends up as her sworn protector this time around. I imagine she'd have a newfound disdain for both Rhaenyra and Criston Cole in this timeline. Not only is Rhaenyra sleeping around with someone outside of her marriage and producing bastards to pass off as true-born heirs, she's doing it with a Kingsguard knight, someone sworn to swear off everything else for the sake of the crown, and Criston is repeatedly breaking his oath and somehow still in service. How could a man like that possibly serve the royal family? Well, he is, just in different ways. But either way, she can't do anything about it. Even if Rhaenyra and Criston are breaking the law repeatedly, Rhaenyra is still the heir. Trying to call her out could have dastardly ramifications. So, like with Harwin and canon, she just has to deal with it and hope they somehow expose themselves. Regardless, the story is still somewhat the same for a bit earlier on. Aemon still gets bullied by his brother and the Cole boys, but when training comes around, this may perhaps be a small difference, but assuming Criston is still in charge of training the kids, he most likely won't be as biased as he was originally. In canon, he neglected the Strong Boys' training since they were bastards, but now they're his bastards. So it makes more sense for him to train them properly this time around. He's not gonna play favorites though just because these are his kids, however. If he starts playing favorites, he might risk exposure, kinda like Harwin Strong in the canon timeline. So in public, he has to be neutral towards all the kids. So this may mean that Rhaenyra's first sons end up being better fighters since they're gonna get proper training earlier on. Maybe Jace will get some better posture. Either way, I don't see a fight breaking out in the courtyard this time around since Harwin Strong won't be here, and I doubt anyone would try to actually antagonize Criston Cole. But even if that were the case, Criston, despite being a brute, has his intelligent moments, like when he provoked Sir Harwin with little to no effort. But in that instance, I guess you could argue, was Criston really being smart, or was Harwin just being dumb? Maybe he was smart enough to know Harwin would do something dumb at the smallest provocation. But I digress. Speaking of Harwin, since he is not the lover of the princess, this most likely means he doesn't get killed by Larys. He won't have a reason to attack a Kingsguard knight and disgrace himself, and his father Lionel won't feel so guilty about his son's affair that he goes back to Harrenhal with him. But that isn't going to save the hand of the king. I imagine Alicent will still wish to have her dad back so she has more support, and Larys will most likely orchestrate the death of his father. But it'll be more isolated this time around since Lionel and Harwin aren't going back to Harrenhal. He may plan some kind of accident to get his dad killed so Otto can come back. This would mean that Harwin becomes Lord of Harrenhal since he won't be dead, which is an interesting change when it comes to Criston. In canon, Rhaenyra's lover Harwin died with his father in order to get Otto back to the capital, but this time around, her new lover, Criston, isn't being assassinated or collateral damage, which means that Rhaenyra has a lover that stays by her side throughout the story since he's not being killed off. Since he's not being exiled or killed, this means when she ultimately makes the same decision to leave King's Landing, he's going with her to Dragonstone. And this could potentially pose a problem when Daemon is back in episode 7. For better or worse, Rhaenyra and Daemon have a connection. One Daemon didn't have with Laena, and one Rhaenyra didn't have with Harwin. They love each other, air quotes, and with both of their partners being dead, there wasn't much of an issue when it came to them getting together. But in this timeline, Criston is still alive. He's the father of Rhaenyra's first 3 children, and for years he'd essentially been the only one in bed with Rhaenyra. So if she still pursues Daemon, this could cause some issues with their relationship. It could result in some kind of love triangle. If Criston really loves Rhaenyra, but she really wants Daemon, and Daemon wants her. If that pairing were to happen after they fake Laenor's death, I personally believe that Criston Cole would end his relationship with Rhaenyra, perhaps feeling betrayed. If she marries Daemon like she does in canon, it's going to be clear that it's about more than just politics, but for love. She may care about Criston, but the love or connection she shares with Daemon is something she does not have for Criston. So after that, the only reason I could see Criston staying loyal to her is for his sons. He's their true father, and it's his duty to ensure that they survive. So there could honestly be some friction in Team Black. But moving on, the Driftmark episode goes fairly the same. Aemon still gets his dragon and still loses his eye to Lucerys. Some different things may happen during the fight, like instead of calling the boys Strongs, he'll call them Coles or something. Then later on, like in canon, Alicent demands an eye for Aemon, but since Criston isn't her sworn protector, she'll likely have to ask Eric Cargyle to do the deed. And when the fighting breaks out, Criston Cole and Daemon will be the ones to rush to Rhaenyra's defense. So instead of fighting each other like they did in canon, they work together. Moving on to episode 8, things go more or less the same, I would suppose. There's the petition for Driftmark, Jace and Luke go into the courtyard where they run into Aemon training, but this is different. Since Criston is with Rhaenyra, he'll most likely be training with Eric Cargyle or someone else most likely. And this could potentially mean that Aemon may not be as good of a warrior in this timeline as he was in the canon one. Talented as Eric may be, he lost to Criston in a one-on-one fight, and Criston has been training Rhaenyra's sons exclusively for these past few years. Or maybe Aemon has such a talent for the sword to the point where it doesn't really matter who he gets trained by. Who knows? But regardless, the petition most likely ends up the same way it did in canon, with Vaemon getting to keep his tongue, courtesy of Daemon. And when dinner rolls around, Aemon's gonna need to find a new insult this time around.
Let us drain our cups to these 3 strong boys.
Because these aren't strong boys anymore. Perhaps he could give a longer tribute this time around, and perhaps say something like, the only purpose for coal is to burn. Just something that came to my mind. But seeing as not much really changes in episode 8 from my point of view, we'll move on to episode 9. When the king dies, the Greens make plans to secure the Iron Throne. Originally, Criston Cole actually kills Lyman Beesbury for going against Alicent during the coup. Since mentally unstable Criston isn't here, this most likely means that Lyman isn't killed, but instead detained for protesting Aegon's ascension. Harold Westerling would most likely still quit whether or not someone gets murdered though. But moving on. When Aegon goes missing and someone needs to find him, Criston Cole won't be available to help. Assuming that Otto manages to get the help of both the Cargyle brothers like he did in canon, this may mean Aemon may be on his own when trying to find his brother. But there could be another option for some help he could get. If he can't get the help of Eric Cargyle, then perhaps he could get some help from his uncle. Alicent Hightower has a brother we see briefly in episode 1 who goes up against Daemon in the tournament. Around this time, if I'm not mistaken, we don't see him, but Gawain Hightower should be at court with his father and sister. He's actually a member of the City Watch. So perhaps if the Queen gives him a personal summons, he could help Aemon search for Aegon. And assuming things go the same way, this could lead to a fight with Eric Cargyle like it did before. But this time around, instead of fighting Criston for Aegon, Eric would probably have to fight Gawain, and Gawain would probably lose, which could result in a more interesting matchup. If his uncle loses, this means that Aemon would have to fight Eric for Aegon while keeping his brother from escaping. But Eric is only one person since his brother abandoned him, so if both Gawain and Aemon team up, they could probably secure Aegon. But regardless, when the coronation rolls around, obviously Criston won't be here to crown Aegon as the king. So we'll say in this timeline, Alicent is the one who puts the crown on Aegon's head. And when episode 10 rolls around, when news reaches Rhaenyra of her father's death and Eric Cargyle comes with Viserys' crown, Criston Cole will be the one to place it on Rhaenyra's head. In the books, Criston Cole was known as the Kingmaker. When Aegon ascends to the Iron Throne, he gives a speech bashing Rhaenyra and her bastard sons as he crowns Aegon king. He actually ends up being the one to convince Aegon to become king and take the crown, instead of in the show where he's just kind of forced into it. So this time around, with him supporting and crowning Rhaenyra, he goes from being the Kingmaker to being the Queenmaker, and perhaps named Lord Commander of her Queensguard, like how Alicent named him Lord Commander after Harold Westerling quit. Now, with this video, I kind of feel like it's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to things that could change in House of the Dragon, as I'm only going off of the first season of the show. It may not seem like much at first, but in Criston Cole staying loyal to Rhaenyra, being her lover, and swearing fealty, a lot changes. The Greens lose a pretty big player in Criston Cole, and this would alter a good few things that go beyond the first season, into season 2 of the show, and into book territory. But I'm just going to cut it here at season 1 for the time being. So for now, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you thought in the comments, and I will see you all next time.